The story begins with the fact that it was a good sunny day. But the main character again managed to fall into trouble. This time, he was beaten by Verzel by the name of Main, who wanted to remove the competitor. After all, Jung until recently was a guy, his current girl Yoon. Thunder continued to apply the strongest blows to a helpless teenager. Kian, in turn, did not even have time to understand what was the matter, and asked what such an aggression of man was caused by. The angry Verzila said that the guy literally harasses his beloved girl with constant calls. At that moment, the culprit of what had happened came up to them and confirmed the words of Gromila, adding that Jung did not bring her to any good restaurant for all the time, and did not give anything, unlike Main. Xian said in a stifled voice that he actually already bought her a phone, but he was stolen. Naturally, she did not believe him and left with Verzila in an unknown direction. The young man was in an absolutely depressed state and did not know what to do. After all, the noble betrayed him, and in pursuit of a rich life, she completely forgot about feelings. Then Jung literally went into the separation and did not stop visiting the bars, where he was pretty drunk, and even friends could not reassure him, and even more so to persuade him to drink less. At the same time, they knew the whole history of events and promised to take revenge on the arrogant man. However, even getting drunk to the dump, Qian did not feel the best way. He wanted something more. In search of an unknown turning point, he went out into the corridor and went down to the hall, where he suddenly discovered empty pockets and only a little money remained on the map. Suddenly he received a certain notification, and Jung hurried to look at him. The unknown application invited him to open the prefectural circle of friends. The perplexing Qian could not understand where he got this program. A moment later, the guy saw a beautiful stranger with a lateral vision, but in the end result, he did not manage to step aside and accidentally pushed her. The teenager was nervous, seeing that the girl literally collapsed to the ground. As a result, he immediately ran to her and asked if everything was fine with her. Having looked at, Jung found her tearful face. The young lady rushed to him and began to beg to help her fight off the bandits. But since Qian has already gained experience in communicating with girls, he understood that he could not be leaded to her tricks. But subsequently, the young man could not resist her and of course agreed to help. Having reached the hotel room at the hotel, there were no pursuers along the way. What seemed strange enough, and the situation took an unexpected turn, where they were in the bedroom and it is not clear what they waited. Jung first stayed with the girl alone and did not know what to do. Suddenly, a trembling voice. He said that he could call the police, and they will decay everything. The stranger instantly rushed at him with the words that the guy would not do this in any case. Then she asked if he really does not like to be with her in the same room. Stunned, Qian said that first of all, they need to recognize each other better. However, the persistent girl said that right now they are doing this, which finally confused the young man. The shocked teenager, in turn, noticed that she was a rather straightforward person. The girl continued to put pressure on him in every possible way, and, as a result, flooded him on the bed. Jean's thoughts began to be confused and not allowed to concentrate on what was happening. After all, he perfectly understood that he could not miss such an opportunity, especially since it was extremely difficult. But it was at that moment that unknown people broke into their room. The main character did not expect this in any way. The girl made an innocent look and jumped out of bed. Meanwhile, strangers shot what they saw on the camera's camera and were not shy in expressions. As a true gentleman, a teenager urged the girl to run away, saying that he would delay them. But the young lady absolutely calmly headed towards the bandits. Then Jung understood everything. Once, Qian heard about such situations, but did not think that he would fall into one of them. Suddenly, Verzala said that now the young man was obliged to pay well, because they shot everything on the video and he could not get out. But at the same time, the teenager was calm. Suddenly, Jung raised the phone up and said that he had already called the police. Therefore, it is better for them to quickly get out before the arrival of law enforcement officials. At a certain time, everything was quiet in the room, but after a moment, a wild laughter rang out. The thugs could not resist laughter and continued to mock the guy, who saw on the phone a message about the activation of the prefectural circle of friends. In a hurry, Chen tried to cancel this action to call the police, but the application did not allow him to do this. Jung began to understand that he was the end. At this moment, one of the bandits again demanded that the teenager pay them. Naturally, the young man said that he had no money, then caused an inadequate reaction from the armed Verzila. Seeing that the thug was struck with a bat, Chen covered himself with his phone. After a second, the bit was struck by a mobile phone, and a bright light burst out of it, which symbolized that the prefectural circle of Jen's friends is successfully open. The light was so bright and dazzling that some had their eyes. In the end result, the thugs completely forgot about everything and tried to escape. But the explosion suddenly thundered, and the light wave parted throughout the number. A few minutes later, Chen came to his senses and could not understand what it was, and why the phone shone so much. After all, the flashlight built into it never shone in this way. Besides, he could not turn on. Turning back, Jung saw the scattered bodies of bandits throughout the room. The guy was at a loss. Believing that being in particular condition, he dealt with them. In his hands, he had a phone with an unknown and extremely miraculous application. The teenager looked at the next notice from the program where he was informed of the activation of the prefectural circle of friends. A moment later, a certain bull asked in a chat of the application that he would give Guan for his birthday. The main character was horrified, thinking that it was some kind of terrible and incomprehensible dream. Then he took the girl in the arm, who set him up, and headed for the exit until the bandits woke up. But on the threshold, there were already law enforcement officers who hurried to him. Zheng did not have time to understand who was in front of him, since the officers entrusted him with a flashlight in the face. Then the young man heard that they were from the police, and immediately declared his innocence. The next day, Qian told the investigators everything, but at the same time he decided to help the stranger again. And after a while they left the police department together. The girl suddenly burst into tears and began to ask for forgiveness from the guy, saying that he is a kind person. Zheng in response asked why she contacted thugs and helps them. The young lady averted her worthy gaze to the side and ignored his question. Then she offered to talk about this another time and added that she needed to go home. Surprised, Qian shouted after her name and asked her name. The girl slowly headed for the car. Realizing that she would not reciprocate, the teenager once again disappointed in women. At this moment, the bull from the prefectural circle of friends called Zheng into the voice chat, where he again raised the topic of the gift for Van. Suddenly he saw a paper model of the mansion in front of him and thought that this was a suitable option. In this connection, I decided to take a picture of it and send it to the bull, asking if this is suitable as a gift. Naturally, Lao was satisfied and noticed that the baby was quite generous. Chang also saw a model of a sports car and asked if they needed a car. Of course, everyone appreciated his gifts and were extremely grateful. Meanwhile, the elders discussed the sudden appearance of a beginner at Bodhisattva. However, not everyone liked this, because the Tibetan king did not take anyone into students for thousands of years. After a couple of seconds, a huge paper mansion sharply appeared in front of them, which seemed a real creation of architectural art. Everyone was in shock. The sages were literally taken by speech. They could not understand what happened and where this castle came from. At this moment, one of the elders fell into his hands a letter from Zhen. The servant of the king hastened to read him, where I learned that this house is a gift to Guan in honor of his birthday from a newcomer. In this connection, everyone understood that they clearly underestimated the guy and he could be useful. The next day, the main character hurried to an interview, but no one still called him. There was only a couple of minutes remained. Chen understood that he could not be late for an interview. A moment later, a message and crediting 1,000 points came to his phone. It turned out that Sina liked his gift, and in this way he thanked Jean for generosity. The guy again stared on the phone and did not pay attention to the girl. As a result, I encountered her, and the young lady instantly landed on the ground. Qian suddenly recognized Lu Yu in her, and asked if everything was in order with her. Li suddenly smiled at him and said that nothing terrible had happened. The school children who observed from the outside began to envy Zheng, dreaming at this moment to be in his place. However, happiness did not last long, because Qian again fell into trouble, in the face of a guy Lu with his friends. The guy did not understand how over the past few days, he constantly managed to find himself in the wrong place. Dong immediately began to provoke a teenager and say what is his girlfriend, but unexpectedly, the young lady decided to intercede for Zheng and said that he was not to blame for anything. After that, Yu asked him to immediately leave this location. The Qian, of course, agreed. However, turning back, he drew attention to the shimmering path of him. Fan, in turn, said menacingly that Zheng would not go anywhere until he allowed to do this. Lu continued to persuade Hong so that he would not touch the Qian and let him go. But at this moment, the young man realized that if she did not help her, then she would constantly suffer from this garbage. In this connection, he threatened Dong. Fan was extremely surprised by Zheng's sharp statement and continued to provoke him. But at the last minute, Qian said that when he prepares, he would definitely deal with him. Naturally, everyone laughed at him, but the guy himself began to write Lao to influence the situation. The bull, in turn, suggested a beginner of the prefectural circle of friends, a certain power of Shang Yi, saying that Zheng will become a great warrior with her, after which he asked her 5,000 points. Then Xiang realized that it was a hellish currency and successfully activated this ability. The teenager felt a sharp surge of strength, experiencing incredible sensations. From the side, it seemed that he was shaking with fear, which again exposed himself to the laughing stock. Meanwhile, Hong's friends were tired of standing idle, and they hastened to attack the malts. The extremely worried Lu Yu once again called on the teenager to leave, but Zheng chose another scenario, in connection with which he attacked the first. Having inflicted a powerful blow, Qian broke his nose to one of the henchmen of Dong. Then he figured out the rest. His ferocious series of blows plunged everyone into horror. Fan, in turn, backed away, realizing that the guy was really extremely dangerous. After a few seconds, the beaten friends of Hong ended up in a garbage tank. Dong was dumbfounded by the incredible abilities of the young man and did not know what to do. Feeling his advantage, Zheng began to provoke a Fan, but he refused to fight him. The students observing what was happening could not believe the eyes, because Qian was never so strong. Li suddenly smiled at him and said that he was rather brave and strong. What the guy was delighted, understanding, because the most beautiful girl praised him. Running away, Dong shouted after Zhen that he would soon pay for his actions. Yu, in turn, continued to praise the protagonist, saying that she did not expect such a thing from him. Qian immediately said that if the Fan again pester her again, then she can always turn to him for help. Then he hurried to an interview. A dumbfounded classmate asked what his name was. The young man called himself a king and suddenly stopped. Then he breathed deeper the air and smiled. Turning around, Zheng named his real name and disappeared in an unknown direction. The girl felt inexplicable admiration for a teenager and looked after him, believing that such a person could help her solve problems. But his name was silly. At this moment, the application system issued the task of Qiang, where it was necessary to rob the rich and give everything to the poor. Soon, Zheng arrived at an interview in the hospital, where an irresponsible employee played on the phone and asked him to go later. An extremely displeased teenager left the office, realizing that it would be better if he talked a little with Li. But unexpectedly, Yoon noticed him. In the arms of her new guy a wound, she called the Xiana a loser. Naturally, a dumbfounded young man could not miss such insults by his ears. Hao, in turn, stated that his uncle is the deputy head physician, and he could affect Zheng's employment. But only if he knelt before him right now, of course. Qian did not do this. At the same time, he decided to demonstrate Van his acquired skills, especially provoking the wound to aggression. He said that he has good marks, and he did not need Hao's handouts. Then Van nervously stated that he could make Zheng be in the morgue. Suddenly, Yang intervened in the conversation, and noted that Qian was clearly ill, and came to the doctor. What made the guy laugh, and he did not restrain his emotions, Ran came into rabies. In this connection, Hao asked why Zheng laughs, and what had amused him so much. The teenager immediately told the story of how Yun was in Main's arms yesterday. Wang said shocked that this was not true, and she was in training. But at that moment, a mysterious stranger appeared and pretended that Qian is her boyfriend. A surprised young man recognized her and her a girl whom he helped get rid of the thugs. Subsequently, what Zheng decided to play along with, which literally dumbfounded Vanna with John. In fact, he did not understand where the girl came from. But it was nice that she decided to pay him for kindness. The enraged wounds at this time simply went crazy, and said that Qian is not worthy of such a beautiful girl. Of course, Yun did not like it, and she began to find out the relationship with him. Then Hao said that Jan really was not in the hall, and her clothes smelled tobacco, after which he left, leaving her alone. The young lady was shocked by such a turn of events. Meanwhile, Zheng thanked an unknown assistant who appeared extremely successfully. Then he asked why she was in the hospital. The girl said sadly that her mother was ill, adding that her mother caught a cold a couple of months ago, and now the condition has worsened. Then the Qian proposed to personally cure her mother, as he was well versed in medicine. Soon they went to the girl's mother, and the guy ran into a problem, because in fact he understood little in medicine. For a long time, the main character made a smart look and tried to measure a woman's pulse. Not understanding what to do next, the guy continued to inspect her with a business expression on his face. At that moment, the doctor entered the ward and was indignant, because he had just examined the patient's leg and had already prescribed treatment, adding that some child cannot understand him better in medicine. Then the doctor approached Juan and said that she would better trust professionals. Jaina extremely did not like the behavior of the fat man, and he wanted to help the girl fight off him. In this connection, the young man said that professionals are treating her for too long, but the woman still has not recovered. Then Chiang instantly ran around the corner to look on the internet what to do next. Suddenly he lit up that you can try to ask friends from a circle. Besides, the beating technique was quite effective. The teenager immediately wrote Lao, who called him, turned to the elder of medicine Suna. In the end result, Jung bought a huge number of medical techniques, which he instantly began to study. There was too much information, but subsequently, Chen successfully coped with the task and went to the ward, where he confidently stated that she had a stomach disorder, and for treatment it is necessary to boil 20 grams of rhubarb. However, the doctor again began to be indignant, saying that the guy carries complete nonsense, because she could not stand even one dose. But Jung again accused him of incompetence, and asked how he even became a doctor with such a level of knowledge. For a long time they found out which of them a medical guru, and how to treat the mother of Huan correctly. But at some point, the director of Mu entered the ward and drew attention to the young man. Hearing incredible things from Chen, Lao approached him and asked why he needed rhubarb. Zheng strained and looked at the head physician, realizing that now is the time to prove himself. Then he said that the doctor's medicine only restrains the heat in the woman's body, but does not heal, and rhubarb can produce both types of outer air, because the accumulation of food occurs in the intestines. Van began to smile and once again stated that the male was carrying complete nonsense. However, Mu had a different opinion, and asked Min how he went through the internship and became a doctor. The dumbfounded Yan did not know what to answer, and asked the director with a trembling voice. Lao, in turn, immediately fired Van as he brought the patient to a serious condition. Ming began to make excuses and beg from the head physician the last chance. The orderlies hastened to get him out of the ward. Soon, Lao prescribed another attending physician and gave him an order regarding the necessary drugs, after which he completely suggested that Zhen follow him to diagnose other patients, adding that in fact the young man has the potential with a successful location of affairs. He is waiting for the greatest future. Meanwhile, Hao began to carefully prepare for the interview, because he found out that his uncle was fired. Going into the office, he greeted the protagonist and said that he wanted to get a job. Naturally, Chiang recognized the young Van and extremely reluctantly greeted him. The shocked Wounds could not understand where this annoying person came from here. After all, now it was his turn. Jung decided to pull the pleasure and behaved quite busily. Then he showed his badge, where it was written that he was an interviewer conducting an interview. Hao was at a loss, not understanding how he managed to occupy such a position. In this connection, Van immediately began to bow to him and asked to forget past grievances. Qian suddenly stated that he was distinguishing between work and personal life, but the appearance of the wound and assessment did not impress him. Hao agreed with everything. In fact, the guy was furious inside himself and did not know how to withstand this humiliation. At that moment, someone suddenly began to call for the help of the doctor, and Jung went to the corridor, where he saw a huge beaten guy in front of him, who was already standing on the threshold of the office. The young man urged him to calm down and normally explain what happened. But in response, the nervous stranger began to scream, saying that the molester immediately invited the real doctor. Qian also saw a wounded guy on a gurney and ran to him to figure out what was the matter. The teenager was unconscious of a large loss of blood, as his leg was broken. Jung was shocked by such a picture and tried not to look at the patient's leg. The nurse noticed that it was the son of Lin Chan, and his name is Tian A, so it should be hurrying. Hearing the screams outside, the head physician Mu ran out into the corridor and asked what was happening, where suddenly I saw Main, who nervously urged him to call Orthoped Chan, adding that if they do not cure the young Master Lin, he will destroy this hospital. The nurse sadly said that now the hour of peak and Lao will take at least 2 hours to get to the hospital. The dumbfounded Meng was angrily said that they could not wait for so much time. The guy literally lost his temper and tried to hit an employee of the medical staff. However, Chen in a timely manner grabbed his hand and turned it in the opposite direction, having stated that the hospital is not a place where you can sort things out and behave in this way. But Mu suddenly defended Men and urged the interns to let him go, as the consequences could be sad. Finally, the protagonist listened to the head physician and released the hand of the representative of the Lin family. At the same time, Jung said that he knew how to save the teenager and ordered to prepare the operating room for amputation of the leg. The indignant Lao asked if the internet really knows how to operate. The director also noted that if there is irreparable, the Chen will have to answer. The young man agreed. Then he headed with the nurse to the operating room in order to properly prepare. Main, in turn, demanded that Mu stop the bleeding. After some time, everything was ready for the beginning of the operation. Jung put on a robe and gloves with a mask. The teenager was very nervous, because this was his first operation, but he relied on the skills of the king of medicine. After a couple of hours, Chen still poring over pulling, the indicators were normal. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he continued to operate E and understood that the mistake could not be made. At the same time, Jung took advantage of the acupuncture and inserted several needles into the guy's meridians. By that time, The angry mother Tyann came to the hospital and began to threaten everyone. After all, she found out that her son was operating on the internet. This news simply shocked her. Fu-chan, in turn, tried to calm her down and ordered everyone to shut up. After a certain time, Qian went into the corridor. Everyone immediately ran up to him. The distraught Van instantly pounced on him and began to threaten if something happens to her son. Zheng, in turn, completely calmly reacted to her threats and silently took off the mask. Then he said that her son is in order, but the ointment from his leg cannot be wiped. With the feeling of a duty, the young man went to relax a bit after a heavy and long operation. Of course, she doubted the abilities of the malts and went to Lao to find out what was with her son. However, Mu confirmed that we are normal with pulling everything, and soon he would be recovering. The most amazing thing was that Zheng found a way to get around amputation, which was extremely surprised by Mu. As a result, the head physician decided to wipe the old ointment. The condition E remained stable. Then Lao called on orthoped Chan to inspect the young man and endure his verdict. However, Tian's condition sharply worsened, and the doctors began to alarm, because the life of such an important patient was once again threatened. Everyone was on the platoon, especially this concerned Mother E, who constantly asked the doctors what was happening to her son. After which, she completely began to bargain with them, saying that she was ready to pay a round sum for the sake of saving Tian. Suddenly, Chen asked her if the internet said something important before his departure. Wen replied that he urged not to wipe the ointment from the leg of E. Then the orthopedist realized the seriousness of the problem. Then he said that in this case they are powerless, whether he naturally attacked Mu, because it was he who wiped out a miraculous ointment. The woman was inadequate and began to strangle the director of the hospital. Suddenly, one of the nurses said that Qian should be at school and this is nearby. Fu-chan immediately ordered him to throw a photo of the guy on his phone and rushed out into the street. The main character at that time was thinking about the incident and understood that rich families were extremely arrogant. But at that moment, a familiar voice called him to pain. Zheng immediately turned around, where he saw a fat man with Yun in front of him. He did not expect to see them together again. Naturally, Yang did not miss the opportunity to take revenge on Chen and said that he was again exhausting her. Main, in turn, swayed the bones and said that now he would again beat the annoying youth. In response, Zheng called him to hurry, since he has absolutely no time. But after a moment, an unknown sports car stopped the teenager's path. The guy bounced back, not understanding who it was and what was happening at all. Main and I thought about it. Did this influential person really be an assistant to Qian? After a couple of seconds, a dumbfounded fat man recognized the chairman of the group of groups in him. In this connection, he hastened to greet him, because the Geo was one of the richest people in the city. But as soon as Main approached him, the bodyguard immediately drove the Verzel. After that, Fu-chung went to John and asked for forgiveness from him. Everyone was in shock. Ian, as well as her recent boyfriend, was at a loss, not understanding why such a person apologizes to the schoolboy. Qian, in turn, noticed that he had already cut off the connection with the hospital as he violated their rules, but Lin said that he was ready to pay absolutely any money for his return. Zhen replied that his disrespect for staff and, in principle, led to such consequences, adding that fate decided to punish them in this way. Chung suddenly burst into tears and apologized to him again. At the same time, the GE literally begged the teenager to help him save his son, asking for forgiveness from everyone. The main character looked at the old man and thought, soon he had one idea. Scene demanded that Main and Yang sang any song and begin to dance, in return for returning to the hospital. The dumbfounded fat man urged him to calm down and said that they had nothing to do with it. However, after a couple of seconds, 3 bodyguards rushed towards Main and Yun. Of course, they realized that they had nowhere to go and began to dance, singing a strange song. Finally, Zheng calmed down, and with a smile on his face got into the car of Mr. Linya. As soon as they arrived at the hospital, the restless mother jumped out onto the porch and threatened the Chen again. But at that moment, Fu-chan passed his nerves and he gave her a slap in the face, ordering immediately to shut up. Wen instantly came to her senses and apologized to her husband, saying that this is all because of the nerves. Zheng, in turn, urged them to calm down and focus on the treatment of their son. Lin ordered Main and his wife no longer interfere in the affairs of the doctors and not interfere with them. After a certain time, pleased Chen and Chen left the Tyann chamber in a good mood. Wen immediately asked her son's condition, but this time she was polite more than ever before. Zheng confidently said that everything would be fine, and in a couple of months he would run, as before. The woman fell to her knees and burst into tears with happiness, thanks to the doctors for the salvation of her son. At this moment, a joyful head physician came to them and praised them for the work done. Suddenly, the orthopedist asked if he had wiped the very ointment from the patient's feet. Mu immediately collapsed to the floor and began to ask for forgiveness, while he dared to ask him to give him the last chance. But Lao ordered to call the police. The orderlies instantly led him out of the premises. Wen, in turn, apologized to the Xian and offered him $10 million. The dumbfounded Zheng, with great difficulty, refused money and asked her to make a donation to the mountain district on his behalf. Gio agreed to enter the same way and make a fee to the charity fund. But at the same time, Fu insisted that the guy take at least a check for 500,000. Naturally, the teenager could not resist this time, because it was not so much money. A moment later, the application accrued him 10,000 points. Qian realized that good deeds would be encouraged by the program. Soon, joyful Zheng decided to go home, relax after such a busy day. But again, someone called to him. The disgruntled young man turned and saw Hao in front of him. The surprised guy asked what he needed. The wounds, in turn, thanked him. Van also hastened to transfer the business card to the teenager and noticed that they knew him, adding that today's Operation Zhen is a real miracle and he wants to learn from him with medicine. Hao in every way began to stuff his friends with him, and Qian asked if he had a car. Surprised Ran answered positively. The young man immediately broke into a smile. Then he agreed to make friends with him and said that now Van would be his personal driver. After a certain time, Hao brought the protagonist to a strange place, which apparently was going to demolish. Zheng called on the wound to stay in the car, saying that he himself would go to the hospital. But suddenly Van again stopped him and handed a package with a certain gift, saying that he initially wanted to present this to a person at an interview, but he was there. The teenager smiled and took the bag with him, saying that he would soon return. Hao, in turn, was excessively subsided by Qian and noticed that for some reason he still did not have a girlfriend. But Zheng instantly stopped the topic of personal life and said that they would talk about this later. Then he finally went to the house, which the bandits tried to demolish in a legally way. Thus, Qian witnessed the conversation between the sides, where the thugs forced people to flee the building. However, people of their last forces kept the defense because they simply had nowhere to live. The leader of the criminal group stood on his own and ultimately resorted to immoral methods. Having ordered his accomplices by force to pull out people, he also took an active part in this. Naturally, Zheng could not allow such injustice and hurried to deal with them. The guy immediately ran to the leader of the gang and hit him on the leg. The perplexing thug collapsed to the ground. At the same time, he literally sat on the twine, which turned out to be painfully painful. Qian instantly said that forced demolition of the building does not correspond to the regulations. At that moment, he heard a characteristic stomp behind his back and turned sharply. One of the embittered bandits decided to repulse such a self-confident teenager, having stated that this child did not run into those and will soon regret his antics. But as soon as he tried to attack him, the lightning Otic Xian grabbed his hand and thereby held back the blow. Then he began to slowly twist his hand. The guy immediately screamed with unbearable pain. Then Zheng asked the others if they wanted to try to stop him. Of course, no one was frightened by the young man. After which the armed Verzili rushed towards the teenager, not at all understanding what awaits them in just a few seconds. Qian, in turn, once again decided to demonstrate the strongest techniques. Ultimately, everything turned out rather deplorable for a gangster group, which Zheng tirelessly beaten for some time. Surrounding were in shock. Passing by the bloodied bodies, the main character asked if their problem was solved. The thugs with all their strength got to their feet and instantly fled without saying a word. Then the guy urged the inhabitants of the house to calm down, as the bandits left their yard. After a couple of seconds, the door was opened by the tearful Huan. Chen was glad to see the girl. The young lady, in turn, ran to meet him and thanked for the assistance provided. Zheng hugged her and said that now everything is fine and no one else will disturb them. Soon she invited her savior home, where the guy asked her mother's well-being. The woman began to thank the teenager, saying that his medicine really helped her to recover. Then Qiang again asked who these people who forced them to leave the house. Mother Huan sadly said that they were from the main construction group and have been putting pressure on them for a long time. The young man thought, as it seemed to him this name quite familiar. For some time they were fascinating, and soon Zheng hastened to go to the hospital on a night shift. Mother asked Nin to conduct a young man. The girl happily agreed. Going out into the street, Qian asked her an uncomfortable question where he asked if she did this with the guys for her mother. Then the young lady told a sad story about how she was in a hopeless situation. Zhen sharply interrupted her sad monologue and said that she needed to abstract as well as more positive emotions. Then he took her hand and added that for this she needed a little to be scattered. Huan tried to object to him, but it was useless and she proceeded after him. Soon they arrived at Hao, who, for some reason, did not wait for Chen in the car. The guy suspected something was amiss and wanted to discuss everything with him, because Ran had to pick him up. As soon as Zheng opened the front door, Van met him with his friends. All as one greeted Nin as a chosen one Chen that he did not like. The teenager urged them not to speak so and in no case to scare her. Unexpectedly, Hao said that there was a way. Join them. What clearly interested him, Zheng also mentioned that he needed one important information. Van said he would definitely help him, and opened the door to another room. Where the bandits were, Huan was very scared. But Chen said that everything would be in order. One of the representatives of a criminal group named John Wei suddenly said that he had been waiting for them for too long. Then he showed a bottle of wine and noticed that she would become a punishment for being late. Ran instantly took the bottle and stated that this was his fault, since he initially indicated the wrong address. Then he introduced the genius of medicine, whose abilities even Mu admired. Wei, in turn, urged him to step aside to finally talk to Zhen. Meanwhile, Hao began to drink a bottle of wine and ask John. A matter of the demolition of the building is moving. After all, this area should be under the control of the main Shu group. Silence came into the room. Then the angry Wei threw out the wine in the face of Van and stated that this was not his business, since the company belongs to the family of his senior cousin and definitely not ask him such questions. Qian immediately noticed that he should not be so angry. Besides, he was most likely not involved in this. One of the henchmen of Yana angrily said that no one dares to talk like that with Wei. Suddenly, the thug grabbed the ashtray from the table and threw it into the self-confident Zhen. The teenager prepared to catch the subject. But the unforeseen happened. For some reason, Hao was struck, and the ashtray literally flew into his head. Then she fell to the ground, but never crashed. The main character was shocked. However, Ran asked him not to intervene and said that he himself would figure it out. Then he asked for forgiveness from Yan and called him to order a drink for himself, and he would pay everything. But the servant of Wei did not let up, and noticed that his boss himself was able to buy himself to drink. Soon he once again rushed to Van and grabbed him by the clothes, closed his eyes and turned his head. The thug, in turn, hurried to strike him and immediately swung. Hao, all this time, stood with his eyes closed and dutifully waited for punishment. However, Zheng could not withstand such bullying and attacked the hen of Yana. All those present were shocked by such an unexpected turn of events. The dumbfounded Wound said that Qian made a catastrophic mistake and brought trouble. Wei instantly jumped up and angrily stated that now they had big problems. The leader of the criminal group took out a mobile phone and constantly pronounced that they could not live, by adding that he has ties among very influential personalities who will put them on his knees. The frightened Van urged Zhen not to hesitate and leave here as soon as possible. But it was at that moment that his mother Tian called him and asked to come to inspect Yi, because he came to his senses, and from now on she only trusts him. Then the plan had a plan. He perfectly understood that the company Main Shi and Lin cooperate with each other. In this connection, the guy said that he is now among the ill-wishers who want to kill him. At the same time, he asked them to arrive at an institution called Hell. The shocked Van all this time urged him to run away. But instead, a self-confident teenager sat on a bench and said that a real show would begin now. At this time, the angry Wen came to Hong and stated that if he again tries to complicate the life of her son, then he is the end. Since in this case she will tear off the agreement of their corporations and his company will be left without money. Main began to beg her for mercy and said that for an hour he would bring her a miracle doctor. Meanwhile, a certain Wu, who defended Wei, granted the Club of Hell. Naturally, Jan immediately ran up to him and began to complain about the main culprit. Hao, in turn, understood that in this case, Zhen would really have trouble. Wu unexpectedly ordered his thugs to beat Maltz so that he understood his mistake. But Russ decided to rectify the situation and asked for forgiveness from the old man, saying that this was all his fault. Ian began once again to mock Van and mixed wine with some dirt. Then one of his servants threw his cigarette butt into a glass with an alcoholic drink. The other completely spat on him. All this action seemed quite funny to them. Hao was shocked, realizing that they would now order him to drink this disgusting swill. Wei blurred in a malicious grin and defiantly took the glass in his hand, after which he held out his wound. Van pulled himself together, realizing that he had no other choice, and agreed to drink it. However, Zheng said that he did not need to lead to them and drink it. The old Wu again said that in this case they would still have to beat them to death. But at that moment, an embittered Hun entered the room and ordered everyone to shut up. Wei instantly ran to him and began to sneak, asking what happened, believing that someone caused trouble and he needs to help to figure out someone. However, the reaction of the ferocious Hong shocked everyone as he suddenly hit Jan. The dumbfounded Wu asked why he did this and what happened at all. Main, as before without explaining anything, silently headed for the perplexing old man. Then he began to apply the strongest blows. The thugs immediately backed back. After all, they thought that the guy would protect them, but instead the situation took a completely different turn. After that, Hun simply was distraught and ordered everyone to immediately kneel. Everyone leaned in front of him and the shocked Wei asked what they did wrong. Zheng, in turn, watched what was happening and suddenly saw that Hao also knelt. Xian took his hand and smiling said that he did not have to do this. Meanwhile, the angry Hong urged everyone to continue to stand on his knees, without explaining anything. The bandits were lost in conjecture, not understanding what was found on him, and why today Main is so evil. At this moment, he himself knelt before the main character, which raised even more questions. The dumbfounded members of the gang began to say that apparently something terrible happened. Hong, in turn, bowed low to Zheng and asked him for forgiveness. Everyone was at a loss, not understanding why Main leaned before the schoolboy. He then said that he was ready to compensate for inconvenience in any way, but Qian should go to the hospital. What literally plunged everyone into another shock. The thugs understood only one thing that was ended. Zhen replied that he did not need anything, but his servants in debt to Van. Hong said that he would deal with this right now, and they will not bother him anymore. Then Main angrily asked Jan what he was obliged to Hao, but the guy began to berate, saying that he does not understand what we are talking about, because they did not take any money from him. But Qian noted that the wound had a head broken, and he was not going to turn a blind eye to it. Hong immediately ordered his henchman to hit himself on the head and stronger. Everyone instantly began to beat his head on the floor, asking for forgiveness at the same time. But the young man did not seem enough. At some point, Van asked to stop it, because they already understood everything. However, Zheng had a different opinion, and called on them to pay for a slap on the face of Hao. The dumbfounded Jan was indignant, saying that he had hit himself, and they had nothing to do with it. At this moment, the old Wu gave a slap in Wei, and ordered not to argue with the teenager. Everyone understood that they really could not get out of a humiliating punishment. As a result, they all, as one, began dancing to beat themselves in the face. Qian suddenly said that this test was over, but there is another thing. The thugs literally prayed to him for mercy, but the guy was not going to let them go so easily. Then he said that they themselves wanted to drink the wound with their exquisite wine. After that, Zheng presented them with the same glass with a button and called for a drink. Wei, in turn, said that Van did not drink this wine and no one forced him. Main began to get nervous again and hit Jan, ordering him to immediately drink the contents of the glass. Then each of them took a glass of such a disgusting cocktail. Then, having documented cigarettes, they threw cigarette butts at the bottom of the glass and looked at this mixture for a long time. With one form, it became ill, but it seemed that they had no other way out. Soon they all overturned glasses and drank a miraculous drink. The protagonist, in turn, came out of the Hao from the room, saying that this is really too vile. Hong was sincerely grateful to Zhen, who agreed to go to the hospital to examine Taiyan. Huan and Van were also followed by the Zion to the hospital, as the guy himself asked them about it. After some time, they successfully reached the hospital, where everyone was waiting for the appearance of a miracle ode. After Zheng examined Yi, the young man urged his parents to load his son less, because he should soon recover. Wen, in turn, thanked the Qian and immediately rushed to the ward to Taiyan. Meanwhile, Main asked the well-being of his friend. The nurse replied that everything was in order with him. Seeing Zheng's hospital, Hong instantly ran to him with another apology. Having stated that he will definitely deal with his subordinates and they will not bother him anymore, suddenly the Qian insisted that they drank a little and discuss something important. A few minutes later, they looked into one of the bars where a serious conversation took place. The guy told Hong about the problem of demolition of the house, and Main promised to figure out everything, saying that he will personally conduct a thorough investigation and everything will be resolved within a week. Xian insisted that Hong not only solve the problem, but also put those responsible for prison. Naturally, Main agreed with a similar disposition of affairs and gave his word approving. But at that moment, the thugs who tried to evict people approached them. Hong immediately ordered them to apologize to the young man, as the company's reputation suffered precisely because of them. The leader of the gangster group suddenly began to smile and went to Man, after which he began to apply his crushing and lightning attacks to him, adding that no one can argue with them, and even more so indicate what and how to do. At the same time, he ordered his dogs to beat Zhan and Hong, so that the next time they would not even dare to see them. Qian immediately got up from the table and stated that they really did not know when to stop. Then a confident teenager grabbed a bottle from the table and attacked the thug. As a result, he broke a bottle on his head, which was painful enough. Meanwhile, Main got to his feet and decided to make a company to his young friend. At that moment, 3 more ran up to them. Thus, Hong and John were surrounded. They stood with their backs to their backs and began to fight off the persistent thugs, which ultimately did it quite well. By one blow, the Xian instantly sent one of them to the knockout. Main also attacked the bandit and made it clear that it would not be so easy to cope with them. Suddenly, one of the thugs said that his brothers would now drive up and they would not live. After a couple of minutes, unknown personalities really drove up to the club, who instantly got down from their motorcycles and headed inside the institution. Most of them were armed with reinforcement and sticks. Their number was huge. The servant Feiya immediately ran to him and said that these two decided to beat them. Huan noticed that initially he should not interfere at all, but now everything has changed. After all, they dared to attack his brother, and this did not say goodbye. After which Fei called for a step forward of one of the brave men. The highway continued to heat up the situation and complained to the protagonist with his friend. However, suddenly Zhao recognized the representative of the corporation Main Shu in the guy. In this connection, Duo hit his subordinate and said that he had no right to touch this person. Gang members were shocked by such an unexpected turn of events. Zhao grabbed his brainless ward and said that Hong is the chairman of the construction company. Finally, the thugs realized their unforgivable mistake immediately fell silent. Main, in turn, demanded an explanation from Duo about the demolition of the building. Zhao instantly apologized for this and said that forced demolition was permitted for a long time, and a small incust occurred. The guy realized where his legs grow from and fixed his angry look at Huan, asking what he was planning. Fei suddenly rushed at Huna's feet and began to ask for forgiveness, saying that he made a mistake. Main said that in this case, Duo is obliged to take on the resolution of this problem, so that he would not have to call the police. Naturally, Zhao answered positively and agreed to bear responsibility for the acts of his wards. Then he turned around and began to count his nearby servants. Everyone silently absorbed the accusations of their patron, realizing that their sweet life was over. Following Huan, all the bandits knelt down and began to ask for forgiveness. Then Duo ordered them all to go to the police station in order to surrender with his own hands. And after they have settled down the due date, they will definitely return to business. Of course, they did not want to do this, but they did not have alternative options. Main, in turn, promised Jen that soon he would conduct an investigation and provide him with a report. Qian smiled and said that he was completely relied on him in this not easy business. Hong made his cigarette and thought, because before in the company there was no such things, and now he began to understand that not everything controls the corporation, and it was time to restore order. Suddenly, Main began to actively look for something in his pockets. Zheng did not understand what he wanted. A moment later, Hong took out the key to the villa and called on the teenager to take it, adding that during all this time he did not make amends, so the mansion now belongs to him. The dumbfounded guy looked at the key and said that this was too expensive a gift. However, Hong noted that justice is much more valuable than material wealth, with which Zheng naturally could not. He would not agree and finally accepted the gift from Man. In fact, the young man was delighted with what was happening and looked at the coveted key for a long time, realizing that now his life will forever change for the better. Soon, the main character went home by bus and reasoned on the fact that he did not want to be the proper application. Although it did not insist on a return of money, you need to do more good deeds, in order to ultimately earn as many points as possible. At that moment, an old woman entered the bus. Zheng immediately noticed her and realized this is his chance to do a good deed, although not significant. In this regard, Chen politely lost her place and asked her grandmother to sit down. But at the same time, he noticed that almost everyone acted in this way, since there were still many good and responsive people in the city. At that moment, he accidentally collided with an unknown girl in a hood. The young man did not attach any importance to this. However, after that he suddenly discovered the loss of his mobile phone and was horrified. Naturally, Zheng realized that he had not just encountered a stranger and followed her. The girl, meanwhile, went out at her stop and ran away in an unknown direction. Qian also ran out of her and hurried to catch up with a young thief to return the phone. The guy called her to stop, saying that she could not escape from him. But the girl continued to run away. Suddenly he discovered a certain demonic sign that he literally hung in the air. Zheng once again ignored him and rushed after the stranger. Finally caught up with her after a couple of minutes, Qian grabbed her by the clothes and already wanted to hit her. But the hood suddenly slipped from her and he saw Lu Yu in front of him, from which he came into shock. The shocked Jean asked, "Was she really?" The girl looked at him silently. The teenager continued to ask questions, wondering what happened to her. and how she ended up here. Suddenly, the girl burst into tears and began to say something inaudible. Then she still said that she was not crazy and no longer wanted to return to the hospital. The young man instantly tried to calm her down and took her hands, saying that everything would be in order. Then Xiang realized that that sign symbolized the presence of another spirit in her body. Then he invited her to find a place to calmly discuss everything and help her. The girl silently agreed to follow him, and a few minutes later, they arrived at her home. Having crouched on the bed, they were shy about to speak with each other for a long time. The situation painfully resembled recent events with Huan Nin, from which he became embarrassed. The main character did not know how to start a conversation, but instead of him, Li did it, which asked him, could he really help her? The self-confident Zheng answered positively and broke into a malicious smile. Then he suddenly got out of bed and said that he urgently needed to move away. The guy went straight to the restroom, where he wanted to know from the elders about Yu. The king of medicine advised him to expel the evil spirit from the girl's body as soon as possible, and would turn to Fan with this question. As a result, Xian wrote Ji, who noticed that Guan often speaks of his successes. At that moment, Lu suddenly knocked on him and asked if he found a way to cure her. Soon, Zheng returned to her and stated that he had found an effective treatment method. The girl agreed to everything. Then Qian said that he was actually a doctor and she could trust him, by adding that the procedure is necessary for whether it should be naked, while the guy immediately turned red from hesitation. Yu noted that she sees him only for the second time, but for some reason she really believes him. After that, the young lady hastened to take off all the clothes. Zheng turned away. Soon, the girl put on a nightshirt and also turned away from the teenager. Suddenly, Qiang stuttering, he said that he was not quite ready and he needed a little time. Meanwhile, someone drove up in a sports chic car to the girl's house. The maid, in turn, completely cut the flowers and did not suspect anything. Seeing the dong window, the woman thought, because with Lu at the top, there is already one young man. The maid greeted a fan with a bouquet of flowers and said that today Miss Yu was not at home. However, an aggressive guy said that he was definitely at home and he knows this, since he has a connection throughout the city. Realizing that there can be a completely different person above, Dawn rushed to the second floor. An angry boyfriend of Yu opened the door to the bedroom and saw a shocking picture, where his beloved was in one nightshirt in front of the very Chiano. Zheng and Lu also paid attention to him and realized that there would be a scandal now. The brutal Dong shouted the name of the protagonist, then began to insult him, demanding that he immediately leave his girl's room. He instantly covered his clothes. Fan, in turn, decided to measure his strength with the Xian and attacked him with his fists. Suddenly, Zhen said that even after his death he did not deign to change. Then he inflicted a couple of blows to arrogant Dong and he flew to the end of the room. At the same time, Fan lost a couple of teeth. Everyone was shocked by what happened. At that moment, the Chen came a message in the application, and he hastened to look at him. Ji asked the guy why catching the spirit had stopped, and noticed that the situation is much more serious, since the girl's body has a vengeful soul, and they have only 7 days left to break this spell. The perplexing Lu Yu understood, in the expression on the face of the young man, that something unexpected happened. What he hurried about asking him, Zheng sighed heavily, and said that there was another soul in it, and this vengeful spirit threatens her life, so it is necessary to break the spell. By coincidence, Father Li came into the house and saw this picture, from which he came into rabies, because an unknown person hugged his daughter in front of his eyes. Mr. Lu also saw on the floor of a beaten dong and could not understand what happened. In this connection, he began to nervously ask the teenager who he was and dared to arrange a pogrom in his house. The main character, in turn, prepared for the battle and stood in a combat pose. But Yu asked her father to calm down and said that it was her classmate who was trying to cure her. Zheng was shocked by such news and did not know how to behave with the girl's father. Then he smiled and held out his hand to the master, but he did not reciprocate him. At that moment, Fan came to his senses and began to talk about how all sorts of fables about Qian. Naturally, his father took his history and threatened Zheng with the police. The guy understood that if the case really comes to the police, then it would be extremely difficult for him to get out of the situation. Dong suddenly laughed, naively believing that now Qian in a difficult situation. However, once again, she called on her father not to do this and tried to pick up his phone from him, saying that Zheng is really a doctor of the city hospital and wants to help her. But the restless Lu pulled out her mobile phone from her and said that such a young person could not be a doctor. Then the man still called the police. It seemed that everything was over, but Qian unexpectedly said that he has irrefutable evidence.